And we are live. So far, only the two of us, but maybe somebody will pop in.
I'll just make an opening statement that it's just the two of us, Glenn and Jaswinder Singh, and that we're going to talk about the slight deep dive from yesterday's meeting, which was to do, it followed on from the general conversation we were having, started by Anne and in particular by Dougie. And then I thought it might be a fairly good idea to see how that particular idea goes down. What I'm going to ask you, put you on the spot for a moment, what did Alex have to say just after just before I lost signal?
I'm not entirely sure when that was. He said several things.
That would be well over halfway into the meeting. So I started off saying that if we take, for example, the proposal that in the beginning there was nothing, absolutely nothing, what could possibly happen with that particular nothing?
Right.
Nothing itself, regardless of anything, the nothing itself doesn't really matter what size it is, because there's well, what's the point of having a size? Who's to say what's big and small, etc.? All that is a human construct. We've sort of said, well, this is a mega star, and we've got a less than a medium star, and then there are smaller, bigger, etc. And the time span that comes into it, we've constructed all that. At any rate, what could possibly happen? Now that comes from looking at what is actually happening on planet Earth and how life, the original life that started, it was asexual reproduction. So where there was one of something, for example, a single cell animal as the amoeba, which is quite advanced, but even the primitive ones, for them to multiply, they simply divide down the middle. Before they divide down the middle, they take the genetic material and share it out to either side, and then they divide, and they are half the size they were, and obviously grow to a size. And then because of various limitations that the larger a cell becomes, the more difficult it is for it to get nutrition from the surrounding envelope to the center, and etc., that it has to redivide at some stage or another.
Yeah.
So the amoeba looks like it is about as large as a cell can get and stay at that size. And if it gets any bigger, it has to divide. So my premise is that everything in the cosmos is a repeat of a process that originated somewhere else. Okay?
Right. A repeat.
So if there is one of something, the only thing that one of something can do is to divide into two. And whether they grow or they don't grow is irrelevant. 1 second. Yes.
Hello. Hello, divided by 2. I'm 7 years old now.
Hello.
That's Guru. She's 7.
Okay.
It's Ranjot. She's 7.
Well, of course.
Lovely.
But when we get to the cell dividing and being able to replicate a similar version to itself, isn't there already quite a lot that needs to be in place at that time?
Listen to this. You have to go to what could be termed as pressurizing the cosmos as it was then. So if you get a division into two, then 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 512, 1024. So it's a binary fission. As it gets bigger and bigger, and the units are subdividing all the time, there is going to come a time when there is an immense pressure on the inside. Must come a time when you can't keep subdividing anymore. It's going to cause an explosion.
Okay.
Or rip the fabric and leave out. And then you've got two cosmoses.
Right.
One or the other will happen. But even if you go to two cosmoses and then uncountable cosmoses, you're going to come to a time when there must be an explosion. Because there is an explosion, that is obviously an implosion as well, because there's pressure inwards and outwards in every explosion.
Yes,
So
yes.
it will take subunits and smash them into each other, and some would go inside each other, and there may even be some that become inside out.
Right. But I wonder.
And the temperature at that time, at the starting point, would be 0. I'm not talking about the 0 on Earth, I'm talking about the cosmological 0. That's minus 273 Kelvin. Absolute 0. So everything starts at that point. And the first explosion is not going to raise the temperature all that considerably. You might get a flash of light, and the light is traveling, and there's an expansion of the cosmos, more room for the units to subdivide and fill up the void again. So those explosions would be something in the beginning that would continue, and each explosion will probably, in all probability, produce a product that may be slightly different to the original explosion.
Right, slightly different and slightly similar. Yeah.
That actually smash particles, whatever they are, into each other, and then they may start clumping and start forming the first atoms, which could be hydrogen. We don't know. It's surmising.
But I would like to just rewind a little bit to where you began, because you asked this question if there's an absolute nothing. If that is to be understood in the most total sense, there would be no movement at any scale, or energy of any kind, no change. And it would seem that if there had at any stage existed a complete nothingness, then that state would simply remain and nothing would happen.
You're now applying the laws of physics as we know them now. According to all the physicists, once you start getting close to absolute 0, those laws don't apply. And once you get to subatomic particles, those laws don't apply.
Well, right, because if there's an absolute 0, then there aren't any laws there's nothing at all. There's nothing to apply. It's just nothing, and nothing happens.
Well, no, even if you take the present known particles, subatomic particles, that those particles do not obey the thermodynamic physical laws or even Newton's laws of motion as we know it.
Right. I get that point, that at different scales there's different laws. But what I'm kind of getting at is that if there was to be a complete nothing, in the sense of nothing anywhere, then there couldn't really begin anything from that. So that
You have to remember, Glenn, that even now you're sitting in a room which is full of air molecules, but in between those air molecules there is nothing.
Right, exactly.
If that nothing was not there, those air molecules couldn't move around. You wouldn't be able to breathe. It's like taking a lump of iron, pure iron. Those atoms stay put; they don't move around. It's a solid.
Yes.
It's solid because it's so tightly packed, whereas air is not so tightly packed. So what's between the molecules, apart from a slight amount of attraction and gravity? Nothing.
Yeah, that's a sort of, yeah. I think I get what you're alluding to, that there might even be a kind of an endless opening between everything. But what I was getting at was simply that this level, already presupposes that there are air molecules, there is molecules, but if there had been a complete nothingness, then nothing anywhere at any scale, then
I'm going to have to shut down this computer and go upstairs and start the other computer. My nieces, they've got together and they're doing some sewing on the machine. I'll go upstairs.
Okay, I'll just pause the recording for a little while then. Yes.
Okay.
And there we are back again with some new guests. So, yeah, Doug, maybe you'll just continue a little bit. We were talking about eternity, basically.
We were really talking about if we were to really sort of wipe the slate clean, start with a blank sheet of paper, in evolving and emerging and enacting a new, fully integrated, multifaceted, multidimensional, fully realized and recognized experiential orientation to our world, our universe, and us in it. Out from under the imprinting of our culture, our history, the industrial stuff, all of that legacy, duality-based, science-based, productivity, generativity, physical and corporeally obsessed, centric orientation. If we were to shed all of that,
self-limitations, basically.
Yeah, all of those sort of cognitive constraints, and really open it up and go and incorporate all the stuff that may not be tangible and may not be verifiable in the realm of science, although a lot of science seems to be tickling a lot of those things or attempting to. But to really sort of put it all together without adding in or stirring in other afflictions of the old paradigm, which is to mysticize it or to deify it or to extrapolate higher powers and higher authorities and quanta outside of us, but really zero in and focus in on the ingredients of the soup.
Yeah.
And there's the corporeal, and there's the physical, and there's the sort of energetic levels and vibrational levels and action levels. And then there are all the sort of network and or connective structures and elements and dimensions between all of those dimensions. And then there's a layer of signals over those networks on all those different levels and planes. And it's a unified view. It's a fully embodied, integrated, felt, sensed, and understood view rather than just an intellectualized abstraction.
Yeah.
And I'm part of that. And you're part of that. And Jazz is part of that. And Josh is part of that. And right now, just to pick one of a million dimensions of that in this moment, Josh's network connection is energetically different for it being through phone than the three of us through camera. And there's a universe of question, inquiry, information, and difference in quality and effect of that. And I'm not coming from a judgment place in that. I'm saying it's part of the phenomenology of this moment that we're co-creating by being here.
Yeah.
And do I know I have awareness of that, front of mind awareness of that. Do you?
Well, I don't know who you're asking, but anyway, I definitely see that. What I just wanted to say, because we sort of just started the recording while we're right in the middle of all this, is that I find it actually to be surprisingly interesting, and as you alluded to, Doug, surprisingly practical to actually look at this basic question of how the origin of all existence, which seems to lead to something eternal, some kind of an eternal action, which is fractal in nature, with spheres of life embedded within larger spheres of life and larger. And something else you also mentioned earlier, Doug, that in a sense, we human beings, our bodies are being renewed every moment, and that strictly speaking, at every moment we are a creature that we've never been before.
Correct.
And
Absolutely. But somehow, on some level, there's a propagation and continuity of memory, awareness, and a crude experience of my being from birth to now. That obviously isn't rooted or anchored in any physical, corporeal quantity, because my body's being renewed every 3 to 5 days. Every cell in it has been replaced.
Exactly. So that's the question of memory, which we also touched a little upon when we mentioned Terence McKenna and Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance. So I don't know if it's even a theory, but at least it's a framework for thinking about memory. And then if it turns out that this is true, that we are, let's say, multidimensional self-recreating worlds of life at every moment who also have memory and capacity, consciousness, whatever, then surely that must be a very practical realization. So that was what you brought up, Doug, was how it would change everything if we actually began seeing ourselves this way in daily life, and that it might really offer us a chance to renew ourselves from the inside and gain a kind of freedom from all of these boundaries of conceptual restraints that are really just one version among an infinity of other possible forms, you know. So yeah, so I think that kind of captures a little of what we've gone through, and that's definitely my feeling as well, that this is true. It is based on reality. There seems to be very strong evidence for it being true, and it's a truth that somehow sets us free.
It's a much bigger, more interesting experiential universe, not caught up in all of that narrative and all of those stories and intellectual and abstract constructions, which on a certain level imprison our imagination, our sensing, our receiving, our processing, our generativity, our orientation, and how we relate, you know, energetically, how we relate and respond to the network we're plugged into, we're part of, we're connected to. And 80% of that we've literally, culturally forgotten.
Yeah.
But I know, I was at my brother-in-law's the other night, and they have a dachshund, and that dachshund is really old. And I was looking at the dog. His name was Sparty. And he's in a huge amount of pain and discomfort. And it's obvious. It's just really powerful and projected. And I could see it. I could feel it. And they're not, you know, at least through my wife's and my you know, our value set and orientation, they really should be taking this dog to the vet and letting it go, and they're not. And I don't think they see, sense, or feel what I see, sense, and feel looking at their dog. And why is that? And how do we open up? How do I catalyze other people so that they can get more signal in a Bruce Lipton context? How can they get more signal? How can they receive more insight, information, sense, feeling, you know, connection, and reestablish those dimensions of their connection and to the network, to the energy field and universe around them? And that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a very practical.
Because if everybody woke back up, if everybody was re-enabled and reawakened to connect and sense fully, there's no more killing.
Right.
And it becomes inconceivable to go down that road. It just becomes a non-choice.
Yeah.
By obsolescence.
Yeah, and I'm sure this is a good point for Jaswinder or Josh to chime in too. But just before that, I also wanted to mention that this also came up yesterday, actually. And since you mentioned Terence McKenna, there is also this notion that there are other dimensions that of, let's say, beings of sorts or intelligent forms of life which can somehow guide us and communicate with us when we're in certain states, and which might be something that can help us in something that certainly will be seen as very overwhelming. Once you begin thinking in this fractal way, the normal response is sometimes a sort of, whoa, this is too crazy. And that's also maybe where this dimension comes in, where there might actually be some help being built in. And I know that Josh has also talked about this, so just wanted to bring that in as well.
I want, there's just one piece I want to add that's directly on that point. I'm working on this reforestation project with Dave Smith, and part of our vision is to mesh network the forest with sensor arrays to be able to monitor it in real time. And there's a post, maybe might have originated from Josh actually, but there was a post on Facebook that, you know, they're finally beginning to be able to map the mycelial network underlaying and connecting forests and trees to each other. And I'm reading that and I'm looking at that and I'm going, wait a second. I'm sitting here, you know, going, we need to mesh network the forest, and we're looking at holo technology, we're looking at nano, you know, nano processors and wireless technologies and all this stuff. And I'm like, what the fuck? Why would we not figure out how to plug into the mycelial network? It's already there. It's got the forest completely wired. It's sensing everything about that forest, from soil health, biome health, moisture, temperature. There isn't any dimension, data dimension of that forest's existence and life and being that isn't registered and being exchanged and communicated and flowing over that network already right now. Exactly why would we need to reinvent the wheel? We need to figure out how to talk to that network and connect to it.
Yeah.
It's really
That
basic.
does make sense.
And Josh, I'd love your response reaction to that, but it was sort of like, duh, let's go back to the 1800s and install a hardware network into a natural ecosystem that has it handled already. Yeah. We're just not connected to it. And with that, I'm complete and I'll shut up.
Well, that's a good point, Doug. It's quite obvious once you figure it out, but until then, you just sort of like, why are we making steam engines and cementing roads and ruining the environment? It's sort of silly when you step back and look at the big picture of thousands of years, and it's ridiculous. It really is. Once you open your eyes and see it, it's like, what are we doing? We don't know. Oh, we're playing a game that some kid said we're supposed to play, and we've all been playing it for years, since the Middle Ages.
And it makes no sense. It just makes no sense.
It doesn't make any sense. And that's why the native people on this planet are looking and going, wait, why did you come over to South America and rape everyone and kill everyone and take our gold? I don't understand that. It's really weird. Yeah. Why did you sell people from Africa as slaves to create cotton and hemp in America and build a country that's the greatest wealth and bully in the world? Like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, more importantly, why are we still doing it? Why are we still?
I don't know.
Last night, we were one moron's fear-based, reflexive, finger away from him triggering a war and attacking a country.
Yep.
He had sent them on their way and bragged about it on Twitter. And then at the 9th hour, for some miraculous reason, I think it's because he's a coward. So there was no way he could actually bring himself to do it because he doesn't have the balls. But the bottom line is that's the only thing that saved us from him attacking a sovereign country for no reason. Crazy.
Well, to bring it back down to, like, I think Aaron Perlmutter just made a post about politics and physics on the GCC's little group there, a group post, and it said something to the extent, I'm paraphrasing, that once politicians realize that it doesn't jive with physics, their whole political ideas have no ground. And to bring it back down to the grounding is we still haven't figured out what a perfect circle is. We don't know the math behind that. We still haven't figured out the physics of water. We barely understand the physics of gravity. We actually have no idea. Let's just be honest. We don't know what gravity is. We can't create it. We can do electrical magnetic forces. We can break the atom. We know strong and weak nuclear forces. We're learning fission, but we don't know what gravity is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at the basis of what we think reality is, that's why we're so off in these crazy, let's go to war with Iran, let's pronounce it correctly. I mean, come on, it's insane. We're living in an insane world. We really are. Let's just be honest about that. We haven't figured out what's going on. We're just creating stories to try to pretend that we have a shred of control. With that, I'm complete.
Yeah, that does seem clear that there is a kind of insanity which is very typical of the human, and perhaps a brilliance as well that sort of goes together with it, a sort of strange kind of brilliance, but well, at the same time, there is this wish to learn more about what actually is, right? So and there is this memory, so I guess that is the hope also that McKenna mentioned. This sort of comes together at a sort of omega point, and that we seem to be rather close to it. Yeah.
Do you mind if I interject, Glenn?
Go for it.
I just want to say what you just said. There's a willingness to know, but is there a willingness to learn? Is there a large populace that once you know, wants to learn what we know? So that means knowledge becomes top heavy, just like the amount of money in the world becomes top heavy. There's few people that actually know, but do the masses want to learn?
That's a good one. And learn, I heard a definition of learning, which I like a lot, that to be change of behavior as a result of experience. So maybe you're
Correct.
asking them, are we willing to change our behavior from these insights, which are pretty obvious?
Well, are we willing to give up our false knowledge once we've learned that is no longer relevant or true because of the new knowledge that takes away the old, what we thought was true, we found to be wrong? Are we willing to give up the thing that we think is wrong, or are we going to hold on to it as tight as we can in our fist?
Exactly. Yeah. Those are some of the big issues.
And that's a human issue, not a knowledge issue. That's a emotional issue, not a logic issue.
That's why I'm so freaking rooted in the experiential, because that's where the action is.
Yeah,
it's on a human level that makes it or breaks it. It's figuring out how to catalyze awakening, not in a coercive way, not in a manipulative way, not in a dark arts way in terms of the old paradigms, but how to catalyze an awakening, a genuine awakening that enables individuals to reconnect with their own agency, their own empowerment, and their own innate, intrinsic capacity to contribute, generate, create, and be valuable. And what we're really talking about is how do we set our species free?
Yeah, I think
I have a big idea.
What's the big idea?
Yeah, that core. Well, it doesn't come from me. It comes from a gentleman who's been studying UFOs and extraterrestrials in different dimensions pretty much his whole career. He was a doctor. Dr. Stephen Greer is his name, and he made a movie on Netflix called Disclosure, and he made another movie. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but he's looking to do something that's a really big idea, and he's raising money for it, and he's already started. It's a movie called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and he's looking to find 1% of the population on Earth to start communicating interdimensionally to other, let's just not call them beings, but call them intelligent physics. Let's just call it some sort of intelligence that we haven't tapped into, maybe the fifth energy source.
Right.
And so he's saying that if we get 75 million people communicating to this other source, then those people will start to communicate back. But they need to know that there's at least 1% of the world that wants the conversation to start. That's the big idea.
Well, that is a big idea. Yeah, Jaswinder.
We'll come back to that big idea in a moment. I'll just go back to what Dougie said, which was the agency to try and wake everybody up. And before I go to that one, I would like to go back to a little line in a book. Millions of copies of this book worldwide, nearly every language. In there is a little line that says, and God gave man dominion over the animal kind. Very powerful line, that, and that has ruined lots of cultures because other cultures have taken that line and said, well, they look different to us, so we'll classify them as animals. The second thing I would like to bring in here is that the world population 500 years ago was not even a tenth of what we are today, really, a lot less. So there was lots of room to expand. And in the very same book, it says, go forth and multiply. We did. The biological prerogative underneath all that is obviously fill the available space with as many copies of ourselves as possible. And the culture that becomes dominant is going to dominate all other cultures. So how do we awake others? Succinctly put, it's morality. Before you start going into anything else, try and say, well, there's something inside you that you should be looking at. We should be instilling morality. This is in the same book as well. Treat others as you would have them treat you. So we're talking about equality. And if we don't do that one particular line, we're going to continue on the path that we're on. So right now we've got the dominant culture that is doing something that started about 500 years ago, 1492-ish, 1496. At that time, this particular culture was not dominant. It had lots of land that was subdivided, and there was intestine fighting, feudal system. Another culture, very similar in lots of respects,
that dominant other culture, was encircling, had already encircled this particular culture 3/4 of the way around, at least halfway around, from Morocco all the way through North Africa, through Egypt, up through Israel, through Turkey, and through the Balkans, landmass, all the way to north of Greece, south of Greece, and it was making inroads into Europe. Half of Spain had gone, lots of France was underneath there, half of Greece. This particular culture was quite a naval power too at that time. And if it hadn't been for the Europeans getting together, raising the cash needed to afford the mercenaries and build a sufficient navy to fight back with this culture at the city called, well, not just attachments, but that was a turning point battle of Constantinople, which had been renamed to Istanbul. So if it hadn't started pushing this particular dominant culture back, I think we'd all be taken over and probably be speaking some sort of Middle Eastern Arabic language. And we certainly wouldn't have gone to the Americas. The question here that arises in my mind is that this particular dominant culture has in its own particular set of instructions, its modus operandi, that it has to dominate all other cultures, regardless. When that happens, there will be peace on earth. And it's bent on doing just that. And the culture that is now dominant has realized somewhere along the line that's what they're going to do. So is the present dominant culture preset now to destroy the previous dominant culture? If it leaves even a small section, I think Iran is about 100 million, 110 million, if that.
I'll look it up.
Go ahead. It's not a lot. So if that was allowed to proliferate in the Middle East, and although it's a Shia country, Shia is quite peaceable. Would that be acceptable? I don't.
81 million.
81 million. I reclined, corrected. So it's not even 100 million. There was in India 500 odd, no less than that, sorry, 300 odd years ago, a particular culture that was put together to fight Islam. And the last master instigator, instructor, did instruct that particular culture to never give up. And that instruction still stands. But at the same time, that particular culture has been instructed that under the right circumstances, live peaceably with everyone. And by and large, it does that. It's a very selfless culture, and it does help all other cultures it comes into contact with. Very forgiving, as original Christianity was. And the name wasn't even Christianity then. So, to cut it very short, unless we have the same morality in all the cultures, as it is presupposed that basically all cultures are the same, yeah, to a certain extent, but there are hidden instructions, overriding instructions, the master switches. that allow them to be dominant over other cultures, unless we have the same morality, that we treat each other equally, the present situation is going to continue till we have one dominant culture. Or, as is presently in my forecast, there will be two dominant cultures. Whereas there are two fighting out to the bitter end. Another one is making itself dominant, and is quite large, quite dominant. And I'm talking about Russia. Although Russia is an offshoot of one of the other cultures, there may be that eventually we might have these two going to loggerheads as well. Okay, so the majority of the people, 99%, and then the 1% or the 0.001%, we're only looking at about 100 people worldwide who make the actual decisions of the 196 countries. There are less than 100 people who make global decisions. Who's going to die in large numbers? What is their morality? Never mind everybody else. What is their knowledge base? What major instructions are they operating under? So when they meet, I'm talking about the very rich bankers, the very rich business people, and these people we know have meetings at least once a year, a lot of them twice a year, and then they can have emergency meetings. They are the ones who put out the propaganda, pacify people while they're actually in the process of annihilating countries. And we've seen that since about 2003, 5 or 6 countries have been annihilated totally. And Iran is next in line. Regardless of anything else, Iran is not going to allow to exist, especially since last year it said it was going to align itself with the euro and come away from the American dollar. The dollar is quite weak, even a year ago, and the other countries, Egypt, Syria, Libya, etc., they are doing the same thing that Iran is doing right now. They were coming away from the dollar and they wanted to go back to the dinar, the gold coin, the gold standard. So they had to be brought back into line. So that's what's going on politically and morally. And what is the moral justification? Is that they're upstart, they are terrorists, they are beneath contempt and must be annihilated because of the way they live, the way they do things, which are foreign to us, and therefore, and we have that justification to destroy them. So whether we destroy and occupy the land, or whether we modify their behavior after the destruction to suit ourselves, how long do we do that? Till the oil runs out? Then what do we do? Regardless of all of that, the morality that we are following, I'm just as guilty. I should have gone on the marches as well, way back in 2002, 2003. You know, I really cannot pretend anymore that I'm not as guilty as anybody else of allowing this to happen. That.
Jaswinder, can I ask you a question? Do you have friends in Iran?
I had an Iranian friend who came away from Iran. I'm going back to the early 90s. Yeah, he said the situation at that time was very bad. That was a transition period back towards the Islamic way of life. The Shah had been deposed back in 79, so the 80s and the 90s, the people who were already born and living there, they had to go change their lifestyle from a European type of lifestyle back to the Islamic lifestyle. I don't have any Iranian friends. Oh yes, I do. I have one young lady.
Yay!
Yeah. Yes, I do. I met up with her a couple of 3 months ago, and we had a catch up. Thanks for reminding me. I'll catch up with her as well soon. So yes, and I do meet up
Yeah.
at the local international. Sorry, carry on.
Oh, I was just saying, I think I have some friends as well, and I think if we can blast out to the world, our friendships are stronger than the politics. We can bring it back to morality of all the friends that we have, that we're humans and we love each other and we don't want to fight each other. I think that's where we're at in the world right now, is fighting has never gotten us anywhere. It's never worked.
Fighting does have its virtues. It's not accurate to say that war doesn't produce anything positive. War, the winning side is in control. It gives them dominance, and they can reproduce a lot more than otherwise they hadn't become dominant. So war does produce lots of things. There are losses.
Very
obviously.
costly, right? Very costly.
So that what you're looking at.
Jazz froze, Josh. That's why he went silent.
Oh, okay.
I
you.
realize you're on the phone, so you're not seeing what's cooking.
Thanks for being sensitive, Doug, to being a phone person for a little bit. I appreciate that so much. It's
It's a very challenging way to participate because you don't have the full information and awareness. So
you don't see us, Josh, right?
Yeah, I don't see you. I'm just on a telephone, and I think it's sort of a metaphor for what a lot of people are doing on this planet. Is we don't see everything that's going on. We just hear. Hearsay, because not everybody has electricity
and it's not just affordances; it's also perceptual.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There are people. The classic thing that has always stuck with me is the idea that when the European tall ships first hit the South Pacific Islands and showed up on the horizon, the natives couldn't see them because there was they had no frame of reference to process them and even recognize what they were, much less that they existed, until literally the longboats were pulling up on the beaches with the armed soldiers and seamen.
Exactly.
And the world we live in and the vast bulk of our species are in that place.
Yeah.
And they don't know. They don't have the affordances, they don't have the information, they don't have the capability, the education, the awareness, the knowledge. They don't have the experiential frame of reference to conceive of their own agency.
Right. But here's the question then, is that something that could change? Because now I sort of, for a moment, feel like taking on my, let's say, practical hat or let's say what's doable, because there's so much that's been brought up here, right? And with what Jaswinder was alluding to, he was talking about many things, but one of the themes was this theme of values and morality, and what is the values, what is the morality of this and that culture, the dominant or non-dominant, and what is the values and culture of the individuals who have a certain power in our time, etc. And then Josh mentioned this possibility of sort of exhibiting our friendship across these somewhat superficial political divides, you could say. And this brings me back to the issue which has been touched upon several times, and that is whether we could have a system in place. I mean, it also brings to what you just said, Doug, that we don't see one another, right? So could we have a system in place where we could really see what the values are of specifically the people who are alive today? What are their real values and what are their real wishes, and who are they in a sense? Who are they really?
So let me challenge that. Let me challenge that. Josh, if you want to say something, by the way, just cut in.
No, please
Yeah.
go ahead.
So, okay, so I want to challenge that. It's not up to inquiring into and them declaring themselves. It's what are my values? What are my responsibilities as a function of my awareness? And if I recognize and can see, the one thing that is the starting place, the given and the great equalizer is we are all human beings. In that sense, every single human being carries innately everything that I am and I have and more, because there's a universe of stuff I don't have awareness of, or that I haven't learned, or that I don't know about yet. But the person in a refugee camp, the person in one of Trump's cages on the border with Mexico, they're me. Have they been given the opportunity to connect with all that is possible and all that they have the ability to bring in and contribute?
Well, clearly
That's
not. Yeah.
that's the inquiry, right? So it's the value that I'm bringing to my engagement with the world around me and the people around me that determines my generative contribution and value. And if in sharing that perspective, I affect or jog somebody else loose into a higher level of awareness and responsibility, then that's all I can do. Because the only thing I have control over is me. And I am projective in terms of my time, attention, what I do with it, and my energy. And all of that is as mediated by my values.
Oh yeah, for sure. But what I'm kind of getting to is there seems to be a need to understand people better, and specifically to understand people's values better, and that if that could be made more accessible, publicly accessible, then that might change a lot. Probably would certainly change a lot, and that seems like something that could build a bridge towards this that we seem to want, which is this general awakening. And
well, I think that's back to Josh's point, right? It's on a human to human, skin to skin, rubbing noses level. A friend of mine who's in Isfahan and I have nothing separating us. We have no antipathy.
right.
We live in countries with governments that are engaged in an insane practice.
and they can have several shared values and shared interests, and the telling of that story is powerful in itself, because it serves as an example of how even people from the so-called different cultures actually share a great deal of similar values. And my hypothesis for some time has been that we do share a large number of values, maybe all people, certainly most of us.
Vastly more shared than separated.
Yes, and a part of the problem is that we don't seem to be able to be aware of this and explicitly know it. And this is this is why the media conversation is this really chaotic soup of nonsense at the moment, where people talk about other people, but they don't actually talk about who they are in reality at all. It's not even close. It's just some totally ridiculous caricature that nobody believes in. It's so ridiculous it can't even. Yeah, but the thing is that this seems to be the chaos that's happening because there isn't this ability to quickly and easily figure out what a certain person's values actually are, and certain facts about them. And I think this need is a need in our time, and that ties in with your big idea, Doug, about a system for capturing the relevant information from various conversations. And it certainly goes with all of my ideas. And this project of this guy Dmitry Sokolov, like in mind, which is a really powerful initiative in this direction. And I know several others are pursuing this. But that is a direction I want to pursue. I believe in that because that would be a very powerful intervention. If we could really have a knowledge repository where we could see who people actually are, and I don't mean all kinds of details, but the sort of really essential things like their values, their morals, what they believe in, what they have actually said, certain facts that we know to be true, things like that. And, not knowledge that's gathered to put them in a bad light. Quite the contrary, knowledge which is collected so that we can actually soon see, even in graphs, where people's values overlap. And even Sam's idea, which seems on the surface very simple, this document of behaviors and agreements in this column and names of individuals in that column, seems to be a version of the same theme. Because if we can have that knowledge of what is the things people actually want to agree with, and what are the behaviors that they most want to engage in, then we can soon see, oh, they're overlapping. This is something that actually is a value shared by a large number of people. And then we have data that can exhibit this. And that seems to be what we're lacking today. We don't really have a good system for capturing that data. Yeah, Jaswinder.
That's exactly what I was going to come on to before the router dropped out. 3 years ago, there was a referendum on more or less along those lines. 52% wanted out of the EU, 48% wanted to stay in the EU, and the number of lies told by both sides were phenomenal. The Brexit, the side that wanted to be the 52%, told the biggest lies. Okay, so the difference is
you also had Putin in there. let's not discount the man who's really running the world these days, because
It wasn't just Putin. It was.
He
it
did.
was
Yeah, he did it to you too. He did the
Yeah.
same to you. He did to us.
And since then, recently we found out Israel had a big input as well. Okay. So the point I'm making here is that 52% of the population, from the very extreme right to the middle bit, really wanted everybody except what they classified as English British out of the country, and the border sealed. We're surrounded by water all around. At the shortest space, there's a distance of only 22 miles between England, Europe, and UK. How do you convince these 52% that
I'm with you. I'm with you. Josh will chime in, I'm sure, as well, but we're in the United States, the exact same phenomenology. They've now become a hardened cult that have been manipulated and programmed into one media channel, and they've literally self-selected and cut themselves off from any other inputs or sources of information. And that media channel is fueling hate and divisiveness and just the worst vomit imaginable. And they don't want to know. They're not interested in distinguishing on cases, facts, or anything else. They believe what they believe. They've drunk the Kool-Aid, and they'll go to their grave from that place. And the damage that is caused and is causing in terms of social evolution and progress it will take decades to recover and heal from, and potentially a generation or two.
But that's when they are identified with that culture, right? That doesn't mean that all the individuals.
No. The schooling system in the UK, since this particular problem has come to light, the curriculum has changed tremendously since 2015, 2016. It's a much more cohesive, much more caring, much more putting into very young. I'm talking about primary school, so that's year 1 onwards, that we are all in it together. We must be nice to each other, and we do the prayers together. So it's going back to when I was in primary school, that same kind of thing, way back in the 60s. And I think that is an excellent starting point, except that the hardened people, and especially the people who are rich enough to send their children to fee-paying schools, and they are actually the governors on those schools, they have their own curriculum. So unless we break that system, the system that produces the ruling classes, I don't mean break, but realign that system. That probably. The other thing I would advocate is that people who are going to go into service, parliamentary government service, I don't mean the civil service, I mean elected service, they should do it for free, except for expensive. So they don't get into that position if they have any interest that conflicts with the interests of government. So if they're in business and they have shares in arms companies, or if they are otherwise occupied that would gain them some financial gain by being in that position, then they are not eligible to be in that position. So what Ocasio-Cortez did, which was to take money from, small amounts of money from people to conduct her campaign to become a member of the Republicans, that is the sort of system we should be looking at. Now, those are the people whose morality is already in the right place, and those are the people we should be looking to enlighten further so that we can awaken more people along that line. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, I'm not saying it's understandable, but what I am saying is that it's the system that we ought to be looking to put into place. And it's a tried and, by the way, it is a tried and tested system. Except like all other systems, it has become somewhat corrupted, but it can be realigned. So
Yes.
the willpower, the thinking, as Dougie said about an hour ago, what he was thinking was already happening, a serendipitous movement. So unless we put the thought into action, and by the first step of action is to talk about it and put something tangible together and then spread it, it's not going to happen. And it's already happening. We have several people who have joined into that system. So it is arising independently and it is being put into place. And I'm very glad to see it happening. I'm complete.
Yeah, that brings kind of back to these conversations and similar, knowledge networks of alternative kinds. Yeah, I mean, again, I really think that example too shows this need for better information about individuals' values and interests and specific knowledge, because that's going to make it a lot easier to connect with those people, obviously, and build alliances and etc. But yeah, including, of course, many people who are maybe to some extent, let's say, brainwashed by a certain ideology.
We're all brainwashed.
Yes, we are. We are to various extents, but we're not totally, right? So that's maybe where the hope is, and that again brings me back to, I would really like to see a better information system, like a real knowledge repository of the people, where we can really gather the knowledge and the values of the people.
I'm going to interrupt you there and say, if you want to see better information, and right now there are only 4 here who have that information, how are you going to see that better information?
I think Josh has a good idea, I think. Tell us, Josh,
well,
how do we do it?
I've just been working with so many different groups on getting data and normalizing it, knowledge repositories, etc. And we have this binary thing on Facebook, like, don't like, and then they spread it out to sad. and then they have angry. It's just, so as a computer scientist, it's really only 5, I think maybe 6 parameters. But because I have to meet with a client in 2 minutes, I'll cut this short, is if you take the ask of understanding and spread it to 0 to 100, and you put a bar where you can stretch it, 72, 27, 52, it creates more nuances inside of the data itself and creates and generates more understanding, more value, more nuanced human interaction as opposed to binary yes, no, yes, no.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman who did this in the early 2000s. He created website called I Feel. And he checked every time someone posted anything on the internet, I feel, and he grabbed the data after I feel very depressed today. I feel extremely happy. And he pulled it all into little bubbles and balls that were nuanced. So you could go to the website. I'll try to find it and see if it's still around. My roommate at the time interviewed him for a reality show. And there's my client, I have to go. But if we take the metrics, stretch them out, and I'll just use the metric of love. How much do I love Jaswinder? I'm going to put it at about a 57. I'm getting to know him. It's been a year or so. I'm not at 100, but I'm definitely not at 2 or 3 when I first met him. I went from 2 or 3 to 57. That's more nuanced. And if we can do that with our interactions, not just, I mean, you guys get the point. I think you got the exact reference.
This is great stuff. We got to continue exploring this.
Let's look at that programming when we program. Let's not be lazy programmers with just, do you like it? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Let's get our nuances. Thank you guys for an awesome conversation. I really
It's been great.
this.
And more will follow.
Yeah, I'll reach out. I've been playing around with saving the giraffes online, and I'll reach out with our friendship connections between Iran and the rest of the 192 countries. And we'll create groups of, hey, let's see what the people in Iran feel about them going to war. And I bet they have a lot to say. Let's hear their voices. We're not listening to them. At least I'm not. I got to call up my friend Payam and his sister and all my Persian friends and just, how are you guys? Ramzan, how are you doing? Like, I'm going to call them. All right, much love, guys.
Well,
Peace.
thank you, Josh. Great
I have to hop too. I'm out of road.
I think we're at the closing stages here. So but
this was a pleasure. It was a fun ride.
Yeah, I think we really came onto some really key stuff here. Do you have any final words, any of you?
I'm all good.
Happy.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot. Well, thanks a lot. So
thanks for hosting and holding the space.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Bye-bye.